Hi, Patricia.
Hi.
I'm so grateful that you've made time for this because um, our history is that I was studying Kundalini with you at your studio, and it was a really powerful time coming to your class 3, sometimes 4 times a week. And I have find you to be one of the purest teachers in that energetically and the way how you speak about your direct experience and what you were teaching at the time, it just felt like it's not often that I feel this clear vessel when I'm around a teacher. There's usually kind of something that I feel that doesn't resonate, which has been unfortunate for me. But I'm just really appreciating the way that you have been bringing so much authenticity to the journey. And today, I know my interest in reaching out to you is you've been immersed in this whole thing around vagal theory and like how we can use this to support our nervous system. But I'd love for you to begin that conversation with what has taken you on the journey towards diving so deeply into understanding our vagal system.
Great. Well, so great to see you, and thanks again for
Mm,
inviting me here. This is a new journey in my interests and passions that, I would say teaching yoga and meditation for over the years, I've always known, and we've always talked about in class, right? The vagus nerve. So
yeah.
it's pretty impossible to not take a yoga class and have some stimulation of the vagus nerve happening. So it was really, understanding what that nerve is doing and how it's affecting us, and knowing that it is such a crucial part in healing and something that I'm really interested in is mutual healing, both of us healing together and sharing together. And this path of recovery, no matter where you take it, it's going to, at some level, it's going to take you into the vagus nerve in your body, the vagal nerve, whether or not you
Mm.
name it and get into the nerdy parts of what it's doing in your body or not. We all have an experience of when this part of our body is regulated and working properly, what that feels like and what it feels like when it's not. And
Yeah.
so, COVID hit and all of our ankles were grabbed a hold of and we were all hanging upside down and wondering what the heck is going on. And
Mm-hmm.
there were, all of our lives, were just completely shaken and turned around and things ending so quickly. And that
Yeah.
was obviously happening in my life too. And so I started to look into it a little bit more deeply, and it eventually took me down, less physiology and more theory, which brought me to um, Stephen Porges's work and Deb Dana's work. These are two people who are really leading the way in us understanding how our nervous system works. So I started really going down that path and starting to see, oh, there actually is a path for me. I can actually study this more and more. And simultaneously, I was going through my own personal crisis and trauma and
Mm.
understanding that there were things in my life that it's not that they had been unexplored and I didn't know about, but the journey of our life when we get to live long enough is that there is an evolution and there is a depth to our healing that we get to keep being exposed to. And so
Yeah.
that was happening to me at a really rapid pace. And so
Mm.
the benefit of being stuck at home with myself was I was able to go deeper, and
Yeah.
so was really harvesting for some understanding of what was going on in my life personally with the lineage of yoga that I was teaching at that time and working through
Mhm.
a lot of shock around information that had come forward with that, and really determined and interested in finding pieces of that that still Well, I guess the image I had of myself at that time was like the house had burnt down. I was going to stick around, and I was interested in kicking around and looking for gems and just seeing
Mm,
what stays, what goes, what
wow.
makes sense to me now, what do I need to let go of. And so that's been, really year and a half long journey. And along the way, as I understood more and more about the vagus nerve and focusing on that with myself, I started to have more words and language and understanding and deeper experiences of myself that that allowed for more healing, more processing
Mm,
at those times.
hmm. Yeah, so it sounds like, and we touched on this briefly before we went live, you were in a personal crisis that had a feeling of like a deep-rooted betrayal and trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and that you came to the vagal understanding it and knowing it because you're a yoga teacher and a meditation teacher,
Mm-hmm.
but somehow it, like with COVID, in tandem with what your personal journey was, it took you really deep into the powers of this form of regulation. And you even talked about mutual regulation. So, at some point, I think we talked about we'll have another conversation about this deep journey that you've been in, like what the gems, all that house burned down, and like the gems that you actually found. I'd love to have you back to
Great.
explore that and hear more about your process around that.
Yeah, I'd love to share that.
Okay, great. So then maybe we could go further into just maybe start with defining for listeners before we go into the technical, like what are the, like vagal nerve is grounding us, giving us resiliency, but maybe you could speak like what is it and how does it actually feel in our bodies when it's when it's fortified and when it's not?
Yes. So I'm coming from the polyvagal theory perspective and what it is I've learned thus far. And this word was really given to us by Dr. Porges. And
Mm,
it really came on the scene in 1994 when he started to present his theory on it. And polyvagal theory is a theory that gives us some language and some understanding of how it is our autonomic nervous system, how our different states of the nervous system are affecting how it is we feel right now in this moment, how you feel and how I feel right now in this moment about ourselves and the world. And so it is this approach that there's this phrase that you'll hear often, the bottom up approach. And the bottom up approach is this understanding that 80% of the information that your brain has about the narrative it's telling you about who you are and what the world is coming from your physiological state, how you feel. Do you feel safe? If you feel safe, you are going to be more likely to be willing to connect, share, and learn from another person. And so that part is the co-regulation, the most modern part of our nervous system that is really quite hungry, the way I say it in my polyvagal theory for dummies approach. This is the part of our nervous system in the last year and a half that really has not been fed. It has
yeah.
been not been nourished because we've been home alone. Many people are home alone in a really unsafe environment, an unhealthy environment. And then when or if we do go out, we have something covering our face, which we, what is going on in our face, just in the little bit, the way that we're talking and the way that you're raising your eyebrows, lowering your eyebrows, smiling, looking like engaging, turning your head. There is so much about our biology, our physiology that gets fed and nourished and woken up when we have this kind of encounters, this kind of connections, and that has not been available. And so that actually was a really big part of the piece that, a year and a half ago that I had been thinking about and just like so many other people, just understanding this is not good for human beings to be like, there is going to be a really serious ripple effect of the mental health pandemic that we're going to continue to see, because we have not been living fully into our biology. And yes, we can survive, but we're not going to thrive. And we're not, a lot of us are not even wanting to thrive anymore.
Yeah.
So it really started to get me excited and curious, and feeling a position for myself in the future in terms of, how do I want to help? How do I want to show up at that time? So anyway, polyvagal theory just gives us this language to understand these kind of handles, these ways into our own physiology, with the respect and the knowing that our physiology is the mediator. It is the way of how it is we understand our own personal narratives.
Mm-hmm.
So it's yeah. So I think that I answered that question kind of, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That was great. That was great. It brought up a question for me. So years ago, I was studying with John Chidi and Anna. They do cranial sacral training in Boulder. And I ended up coming back to John and asking if he would help me build a corporate training, because I was trying to teach about mindfulness, but I wanted to teach about, we are not taught as adults about our nervous system. And it is the most important thing about understanding our reactivity, our conditioning, the way that we see the world. And
Yes.
so I think you'll probably go into this, but he taught me about the social engagement system, which is basically this way that we regulate with each other. There's so much about the spiritual movement of, like, you find happiness within, peace within, and sure, that's huge.
Right.
But there's also the thing that I like about what you're going to be speaking and sharing and teaching about is there's also the need for one another, which is why the mask and all the micro expressions being taken away creates a threat in our body.
Exactly.
So yeah, do you want to riff off of a piece of that?
I'd love to. And that threat takes energy, and that energy takes away from us being able to connect to each other. So, when you were saying that, it reminded me of this great podcast I was listening to. I can't remember what her name is. She's a sex therapist, and she was interviewing this man who was specializing in self-care and all this kind of stuff. And basically, she was being quite candid with him, saying, yeah, I don't get it. Like, you're pushing that, people take care of themselves and they meditate on themselves and they stay at home and they have, this kind of deep understanding of themselves. But I love it that she said this. She said, but we only know who we are in relationships with other people. We become who we are through our safe, healthy relationships with others. And that is a reference point. What I love when we get onto the truth is that you will hear it come up in all different practices, all different lineages, different words, but it's the same thing. And what this woman, I can't remember her name. I think she's a Dutch woman.
Emily? Oh, okay. Oh, anyway, keep going.
Yes, she's amazing. But what she's talking about is the most modern part of our nervous system. Our nervous system was built on top of each other. We have 500-year-old, or 5,000, is it 5 million? 5 million year old dorsal ventral vagal system. Built on top of that is the sympathetic, 4 million years old, 400
Which
million.
is a fight.
This is the sympathetic, fight or flight. And then we have the ventral vagal, 200 million years old. And so the ventral vagal is the part of our biology that absolutely 100% needs to count on other people, needs healthy, safe connections with others. And when we don't have that, we're operating in those other parts of our nervous systems, usually, most likely in their survival state, which is, we're not living, we're unliving, And so, so this co-regulation, you'll hear different words for it, but it's referring to the part of the nervous system where the vagus nerve is wrapped around our heart. It moves up into our throat and it shows up on our face. So
Right.
in our face and in our emotions are written all over our face, and they are projected, they are shared through our intonation, through our voice. So it's not as much what it is you're saying to another person that is giving them a cue of safety. It is the way that you're saying it, that our biology picks up on it and either accepts it as a cue of safety or perceives it as a threat and starts to
Mm-hmm.
use its energy to protect itself, which means that there's less energy to connect.
Yeah.
And when we don't have that connection, sure, we can survive, but we won't thrive because we become more of who we are through our relationships.
Yeah.
We don't do that, you know, sticking at home and, meditating all day. And
Yeah.
actually, that would be a really interesting conversation for us to have, because I just was hearing Dr. Porges talk about this, what goes on in meditators' nervous system states when they are completely isolative and, meditating just on a deity rather than meditating, on or having relationships with other people. So
Yeah.
part of maybe our later conversation is this thing I've been saying to myself, which is I've ditched my sadhana. I've ditched the way it is I've been trained to practice spirituality. And I've decided to instead have better, healthier relationships with people, including myself. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
happier and more full, and I think more authentic than I've ever been, because I'm not because I'm engaging in real life. I'm not
Right.
engaging in a sutra, or
Yeah.
engaging in just a mantra. So anyway, it's about the whole polyvagal theory is about allowing us regulation, because when our nervous system is properly regulated by way of the vagal nerve, the vagal nerve
Mm-hmm.
is what gives that regulation. Then what happens is that we can accurately, in every moment, assess whether or not it's safe or dangerous and start to connect with other people. In moments when there is a crisis or a trauma, something that we have to respond quickly to, we recover more quickly from it through the vagal tone. And so we're built to be able to handle everything. But the problem is that we are not processing it when it's happening. So we have all of this backload of information that so quickly comes forward when we're under any kind of threat. And it's
Mm-hmm.
confusing in our mind because our mind is never going to figure it out. We think we're
Mm-hmm.
so clever, but our body is way more wiser and clever and faster than our mind could ever be. So the real gift to polyvagal theory is giving us an understanding and an access to our own personal states and how that affects our narratives. And it
Yeah.
is profoundly kind, the way that we can understand this heroic effort that we are all engaging in right now, with all of the
Mm-hmm.
threat and all of our adaptive ways of responding, which can look pretty bizarre and weird and might disappoint all of us when we repeat patterns that
Yeah.
that we know we
Repetition.
shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
But when you understand it's the wisdom of your body in the way that it can adapt, and that's what the problem is that we're not taking care of the actual threat that is in the
Right.
body, and that
Yeah.
can't be talked out.
No.
That needs to be felt out, and then we get to talk it out. But
Mm-hmm.
we have the order a little bit backwards still. um,
Yeah. You know what it's reminding me of as you're
hmm,
speaking? And I think Esther Perel might have been the woman you were
yes,
talking about
that's right.
earlier. Okay. So maybe we could put that video in the show notes if we find it.
Yes.
But so when I studied with Peter Levine years ago, one of my favorite
Hmm.
things about it was, and I teach this in corporate, of if you watch the animal world,
Yes.
when they get attacked, an animal is going to, if it escapes the predator, it goes and it shakes it off, like literally physically shakes. We don't do that as humans.
Yep.
We just go on to the next thing and the next thing. And I think what you're basically saying is this is the evolutionary leap,
Yes.
because we now have this. I love the words you just said of like, we have everything in us to regulate. I don't remember the exact statement you made, but I remember how it felt in my body of just this relief of everything we need is right here.
Yes.
But I think what you're pointing to, and we'll get to some practical things later, is that understanding we have to slow down
Mm-hmm.
to actually meet the material.
Mm-hmm.
And we use our vagal nerve to help us do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like what you're saying is the missing piece is that as humans, we have such a self-reflective thing. Of course, we're not going to shake things off, but our body needs to do something.
Yeah.
And so I feel like what you're offering us today is this is the something that we can be doing to start having more access to regulation that is such an innate thing that's necessary both within ourselves and with each other.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anything specific that comes up for you around that?
Well, there is, but first I just want to point out, the work of Peter Levine and just acknowledge, he was actually, so significant in us understanding trauma and how it shows up in the body and helping us to understand that trauma is not an event. It is not something that happened to you in the past. It is a feeling that you are having in the present moment because your body didn't get the chance that the deer got to go shake it off in the tree. And the other thing that the deer did after it shakes it off, it goes back to the pack or whatever a group of deer is called, and it hangs out with them, it socializes with them, it eats with them, it goes back into regulation with the group. And often what happens to us when we've been re-traumatized is it becomes, we don't get to speak it, we don't get to have that self or that co-regulation, we don't share it with people, and so it gets stuffed down more and more, and the mind starts to forget, but the body is keeping score, as that great book, The Body
I
Keeps
love
Score,
Bessel's
says.
book. Yeah.
So this is where it can get really confusing for us in our head. We think we're tracking it. People will say, I know it doesn't make sense. I know it's safe, but I don't feel safe. And this is the body just screaming, just say, please listen to me. Like, we'll help you through this, but we have to feel it. We have to, and we're not used to feeling. So this is where the slowing down comes into it, is that just like if we, are constantly feeding our stomach food, it never gets a chance to fully get the benefit of the food. And we are addicted to movement. We are constantly moving. And this was some of my healing in the last year and a half, is realizing I overwork, I overcommit, I overgive, I'm overextended, and I'm underliving. I've not lived my life. Those go together. The overs, whatever it is we do, means that we're underliving our life. And so what happens when we slow down, initially it can be really uncomfortable, and it actually can be, since we're talking about trauma, it can be re-traumatizing for many people, just simply to be quiet and still. But the stillness allows for clarity. The stillness allows for deeply listening to ourselves and deeply feeling what the truth of our life is. And one of the great teachings from Patanjali that I always hold with me, the writer of the Yoga Sutras, is that the happiness of our lives is in direct proportion to the truth that we're living in our lives. And a lot of us would say that we're truthful, honest people, but when we're quiet, we can hear the little lies, we can hear the little discrepancies, and that's really, really uncomfortable and painful work to do. But it's made better when we do it with each other, when we share with each other. So the slowing down is essential, and essentially it's faster. But it goes against everything that we're taught. We measure ourselves from our successes from the outside, but often those people that have so much success from the outside don't actually feel that. So the journey is inward, and the path is slow and steady, and it's much simpler, but there's so much resolution, and there's so much understanding and self-compassion that comes up through that slow, steady, methodical, just being with oneself. And so I think we're going to continue to see more and more opportunities for all of us, programs, the work that you're doing, the work that so many other people are doing, that give us the structure and the support of understanding what comes to us when we slow down. There is nothing that has ever been missing. It's the grabbing and the grasping,
driving.
The driving, but it's the very opposite thing that needs to happen. The palm needs to be open to receive. But if we're always going after another nugget, we don't get there. And so this sense in the body is very much habituated to that same type of motion until it tastes the sweetness of slowing down. And this is, again, one of the benefits of getting older, is the body just naturally does it. And so slowing down is an essential part of it. And it's a balancing act. It's like how we want our nervous system, how it's functioning at its ideal state. It is alert, but it is calm.
Yes.
So it's that, it's both of those. But often we don't get to feel the calm because there's so much underneath the calm that we haven't unpacked, and we don't know how to unpack that. And again, that's where I think that when we understand the language of, and then the felt sense, the somatic shifting, what does it feel like when I'm with someone and I'm in this ventral vagal part of my nervous system with them? I'm feeling connected, socially engaged, and it's just us, and then somebody else comes in who I don't feel as comfortable with. Can I actually feel myself going down into the sympathetic part of my nervous system and start to work with myself in that way? Oftentimes we just keep sliding down that ladder and we go into the dorsal part of our nervous system where we're completely withdrawn and shut down and just feel like we want to disappear. And so when you can begin to track yourself like that, you get that regulation and that understanding of how to come up into the ventral vagal part of the nervous system. And so to answer your question of like, what are the things that you can do to increase that tone? And so the vagus nerve is responsible. It is the conduit that the information from the liver and your kidneys and your intestines, it's the way that it communicates to the brain. And so when that tone is there, it allows for a more efficient feedback loop. So the nerve is there, it's always there, but the feedback loop gets muffled, and the time, or the maybe the way I am feeling it right now as I'm saying it to you, rather than it being a whisper, it's actually a really clear command of the liver saying, hey, yo, brain, give me this. And it's done immediately. So we can process what's going on in the present moment. And so this is why that vagal tone is, we're hearing so much about it right now everywhere, is because there is an understanding that we are in this very serious place in humanity where we're not connecting and we're not taking care of ourselves and each others in the ways that we need to deal with the challenges of our life right now. And that vagal tone is absolutely essential for us to feel a sense of resiliency amongst all of the millions of traumas that are happening, daily, everywhere. If we really look, it's hard to look. It's hard to be a human being right now. And yet we're all here, and there's our part in it. And that comes to us when we feel resilient, when we feel like we can show up and give what we have today. And that's really missing for a lot of us right now. And it
Yeah.
comes in part through this vagal toning. It just is naturally, the body will naturally do that. And
Yeah.
our entire body is this organ that is designed to heal and regenerate itself, but it can't do it if we keep shoving more information and more movement and more things to do.
Hmm.
So it's rest.
Yeah. So it's amazing as I'm taking you in. I feel like there's two pathways I want to go down further with you.
Okay.
And the first is just this the second one is the vagal tone. So I want to come back to that in a minute. And just for people who haven't heard of this before, they might not know what a vagal tone is and what are the exercises that we do to access. So that's the second part I want to come back to.
Great.
The first part, I think what I want to do is just reiterate a little bit of what you said, and maybe you'll add more. But here's what I'm taking away, and I think, it's informed by what you're saying and also how I'm perceiving reality right now, is that if we don't learn or discipline ourselves to slow down, we live in a culture that is teaching us that our value, as you said, is in our external expression. And so it's in the striving, accumulating, consuming, that's all very innocent, whether it's spiritual consumption or whatever it is, that there's a way that keeps us away from what you're talking about in terms of touching into the trauma underneath. And I personally feel that being a human being, we all have trauma, whether that's personal trauma, ancestral trauma, cultural trauma, and now this epidemic trauma, which is actually dissociating us from this very resource of each other that you're speaking to through the vagal connection. So I wanted to underscore that because I can give a lot of lip service to myself and, to people around me of how important it is to rest. And I don't mean like laying and taking a nap. I mean like slowing my brain down, my busyness down, my striving down, noticing my anxious patterns. What are they driving me to do? It all feels so essential. And it's very hard to do when we live in a world where that's not a priority. And I know the body of your work and what you stand for it is a priority. That is the primary piece. So is there anything more you want to add to that conceptually of like what we're really going to go into more like practically with the vagal about this context?
Yes, there's a word that you used that I want to go back to, and I think it's
Okay.
really important, and it's part of what I have been so drawn to with this approach, the compassion. And you use the word discipline if we don't discipline ourselves. And it's a key point of understanding our nervous system. Our nervous system is in charge. It is doing most of who we are. And so the
Yeah.
word discipline itself implies that you actually have some kind of agency over it. And when we're not conscious of how much our biology is motivating us, really the kindness is that the adaptation to the experience of the threat is keeping the person on that treadmill.
Yeah.
And it's
Yes.
more of an adaptation. And when we understand that, that's what I mean about that heroic effort. Each one of us is heroically trying to understand these constant cues of threat. We don't see it as I'm doing something good or I'm doing something bad. It's just I'm understanding what my nervous system needs right now to feel safe so that I can connect with myself and others and just be myself. And so this is the psychoeducation part of what it is I'm doing right now that feels essential. That's the language of understanding. I'm not repeating these patterns over and over to, because I'm a weak person. It's that I don't understand that I actually feel really afraid. I really
Right.
feel afraid, and I'm not sure what I need to do right now bring safety into my life. But it starts by asking questions, and it starts by us having these kinds of conversation of that is always what's going on underneath it. And then it keeps you from not having judgment about yourself or others, when you can
Yes,
see that we're all just adapting. We're all
yes,
just trying to figure what is scaring me in this moment, and how can I start to resolve and dissolve that within myself so that I can live my life and stop under living and connecting more.
yes.
So
Thank you for that. Oh,
yeah,
go ahead,
that's
and
the piece.
I'll
And
say,
it's embedded in our language, and it's been a curious part of me, especially from the Kundalini yoga practice, where there are all these sayings in there that just say bypass it,
yes,
don't feel it. And this approach says, no, actually
feel it. Hmm.
feel. And
Yeah.
a lot of us think that we are feeling, but we're actually thinking. So we don't know how to feel. So we need to teach ourselves and other people that it's okay to feel. You can feel really shitty. You can feel really murderous. You can feel really vengeful. Those are part of what comes along with being a human being. And
Yes,
when you let yourself feel those, they don't have you by the tail. They don't bother
that's
you.
it.
See them in other people. You can relate to them, maybe even chuckle about them and connect to a
Hmm.
person with them. And that gives us choice in
Yes,
when we can feel that in ourselves. And the feeling of choice is an essential part of feeling safe in ourselves and with other people.
agreed. Yeah. It brings up a story, and then we'll get to the practicality. But I just
Mm.
created curriculum and delivered a retreat for a corporate client. And my primary teaching was on safety and threat, because
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't think we talk enough about
Yeah.
psychological threat, and that they are just as real as any other threat. And one of my probes to them was, it's okay to be defensive.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, it's not. No, it's not. And I was like, wait a second. If we don't give ourselves permission
Yes.
to actually acknowledge that we are constantly scanning for safety and threat, whether that's like, am I good enough? Am I too much? Whatever that is, if we can't acknowledge when it's happening inside of ourselves, we will be doing the bypassing, because, as you said, the adaptation just takes over. That's what it's supposed to do.
Exactly.
But then we can't access these tools that you're
Exactly.
talking about within us.
Exactly.
So this compassion and permission, I think, is in my life, it's the most important
Mhm.
thing. Of course you feel that way. You're wired to
Yes.
respond to that threat, even if it doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And what you just were talking about, there's a word for that that's called neuroception. It is in yoga, we would call that intuition, but the word for it is actually called neuroception. It's in this detective, device that I visualize it coming out of the crown of the head, and it's my SWAT team. And everywhere I
Nice.
go, my SWAT team is like surveying the scene, and is it safe and is it not safe? And it works
Mhm.
without us telling it to work. Like our heart is pounding right now without us telling it to do. It's part
Right.
of your biology, and it is always telling you go in, go out, trust, don't trust. And so,
Right.
yeah, when you start to understand that that's happening and accept it as your biology, you can't, like, I like the way you said it, you are wired to feel that way. And under certain circumstances, you're going to feel what is normal. That's part of it. But you
Yes.
don't have to be hijacked by it. When we deny it, or when we are not conscious of it or learning how to work with it, what happens is parts of our nervous system hijack us. We,
Yes.
we are just like fully in. We are fully
We're
in,
either fighting, or we're fleeing, or we're freezing.
or we are freezing. We are endorsing. Yeah. Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think, so I love this foundation that you're just laying down here. It's basically self-awareness is the key, and self-compassion is the partner, meaning we have to be able to track what's happening within us in any given moment, notice our body sensations, and use that as fuel to then turn towards regulating ourselves instead of acting out of the habitual defensive or adaptive strategy. So maybe you could go into, oh, go ahead. Do you want to say something else? And
I
then,
do. I want to just pick at that word again,
yeah.
self-awareness, because the piece about that is that there are things that we are not aware of. And this is what trauma is, but the body is aware of. So the self-awareness is really around, what does my stomach feel like when I'm with that person? Why is my
Yes.
heart suddenly pounding? Or why am I so happy to see that person? That's the tracking. So it's an understanding that our mind and the way that we even use self-awareness isn't as smart as what our body is. And so when we can feel what the biology is actually having to say, then we can open ourselves up to the understanding that there is so much that our body is remembering that our mind is not keeping up with. And
Yes.
so when we work from that bottom up approach and feel ourselves moving up and down our autonomic nervous system, we start to understand some of the mysteries that are in there.
Mm-hmm.
And they're
Yes.
coming up as these patterns. So yeah.
Yes. Thank you for adding that, because I think it's this repetition compulsion that you've named a couple of times of like, oh, why did I do that again?
Yeah.
And I think what you're basically saying is that's the gift, is as they repeat, there's something to be seen, to be felt, to be noticed.
Yes.
And so maybe we could take that. How would you guide someone from there, where they come to you and they say, I keep attracting the same partner. I keep getting in this toxic job. I keep defending in this way, or I push people, I pull them in and then I push them away because I'm so scared of love. Like, how would you then help them access their body and use, the vagal? Like, how does that come in a practical way?
It comes in a practical way. There are certain things that we can do to stimulate the vagus nerve and to get that more tone, which allows for more feedback. So the nerve is there, and there's a listening protocol that I teach people, or I bring people through. That's one way, but I had this thought I'm going to send to you. 15, I think it's called an article called 15 Ways to Naturally Stimulate the Vagus Nerve.
Oh.
So there's that, but the approach that I take is giving people this language to understand themselves and to feel these different parts of their biology, so that they can track it and understand that it's less about thinking and knowing, that, and it's more about feeling. It's getting into the feel. And it's really simple once you start to practice it, is that each one of us has our own personal narrative. And when we open up our nervous system, it has its own particular landscape. And so it's really a titrating experience between myself and the person that I'm working with, that we start to figure out that person's language for understanding themselves with these feelings and with these sensations. And so once the landscape starts to present itself, it becomes just this direct access of knowing who we are, throughout the day, and how that shifts and changes. So part of it is just this, in yoga, we would call that swadhyaya, like the self-study. Pop your own hood, understand what's going on inside of yourself, and track that throughout the day. So it's a lot of personal self-responsibility work that you're doing, and then there are these extra things that you can do to tone the nerve, and just to start to understand that when that toning is there, you're going to have more access to yourself, more energy, more resiliency, all of that kind of stuff. And so some of the most simple things that you can do and most immediate things you can do are to work with your breath and pranayama, or breathing exercises, which checks some people out right away. There are people who are like, oh, I like anything but the breath work. I can't do that. I don't understand it. And it's so simple. You just simply make your exhales longer than your inhales. When you inhale, and then exhale through your mouth like you're blowing out a straw. Just try to make it a little bit longer than the inhale, and you do that. You could do that, just a couple rounds of that, and that immediately brings you into parasympathetic conditioning, parasympathetic response, which tones the vagus nerve.
Resting.
It brings in that sense of calm that allows you to then connect. So checking in with your breath throughout the day, and I always say, you know, do it when you do things that you always do every day. You go to the bathroom, you make food, you know, drive in your car. Do a couple rounds of those breath, though I wouldn't recommend a heavy pranayama when you're driving. But
Yeah.
just keep helping your body to downshift and to, you know, really tune into, is there something here that really is a threat, or is it something that I'm thinking of from the past? And it gives you the sense of reality in the present moment. So pranayama practices are huge and very easily accessible.
Let me just pause really quick, if you don't mind. It feels like a really important part of what you just said is it's in through the nose, exhale through the mouth through a straw, but a little bit longer. And yeah, okay. And that's what that does. First, I think what you've been painting a picture around is notice if something, well, make it a daily practice, but also let's say you get triggered and you notice that okay, this is a place that I go when I have a trauma. I'm a fixer. So I will spin out trying to figure it out and understand and make meaning out of. And I know better. I know that doesn't get me anywhere, but I'm addicted to it. Yeah. And so what I have to do is come back into my body, but that can be so hard to do. Yes. But I think what you're saying is, if you're someone like me who tends to be able to, I learned as a child, I'll regulate myself if I can fix everything. If I can understand what's going on, I'll be safe. I'll make safety by understanding. Yeah. But as an adult, that takes me out of my body.
Yes.
That doesn't actually do. It's exhausting, right?
Yeah.
So if anyone has that or something else, if you catch yourself doing it, stop trying to fix it.
Yes.
Come back into resting and use this breath as one. And I know you're going to share more. Yes. But that could be one starting point.
Perfect. And so you have to have a plan. You have to have some tools to pull out and like literally visualize yourself, you know, when you get to that place of like, oh, this is what I will do. So you practice it in your mind. And so you have the cues of like, I know I can't fix it in my mind. I know this is not where I should be going. Oh, this is the moment when I get my exhale to be longer than my inhale. And keep it really simple. People get really, something beautiful about human beings is that we really want to do the perfect thing.
Complicate it.
Really like, how many counts and should 8 to 4 or it's just like, just make it feel longer than the inhale. And remember that perfection is really fear. You know, when we are playing with perfection.
More of a threat.
Afraid, exactly. So just do the best you can and then feel. Use those words, share those words. Those words were shared with me once in a teacher training, and they changed the way that I teach. They changed the way that I am. Feel. Say that to yourself. Am I thinking and thinking that I'm feeling, but mostly I'm thinking? No, just feel.
Love that.
Just go in there. Where do you feel it in your body? What does it look like? If it was an animal, what would it be? If it was a color, what would it be? If it was a sound, what would it be? And really get into the biology of it, because then it's seen and then it has a chance to complete itself. And when it does, it energizes you, get something from it instead of it depleting you.
Yeah, so, it's counterintuitive though.
It is,
because, and that's the big thing that I think is so important about what you're saying, is the feel is the invitation to come back, and the mind will probably pop back out and want to fix it and figure out, well, what am I going to do? And it's like, no. The resolution will come by slowing down and feeling. Exactly. Clarity will come. Exactly. Regulation is the first order of all things.
Exactly. It needs to be processed and felt and filtered through the whole body. And the body is so smart and wise, it will make use of it. It'll make use of every little piece of it. Nothing will go to waste.
It's kind of like the modern day shaking it off. You know, we're not going to be in a business meeting going like this, but you can take a long, like an inhale and an exhale, longer exhale, and actually get the same, like you said, you're not building up the residue. You leave that meeting and you're
Exactly.
actually back to yourself.
Exactly.
Okay, so
Exactly.
I interrupted you. You were going to go on to number 2. So do you want to share another?
So any kind of breath practice where you make your exhale longer, and so part of that breath practice, I would also say, would be singing. When you
Uh-huh.
sing, you're gonna and that's
All
one of the
right.
beautiful things about singing with other people. You're getting the parasympathetic nervous system stimulated, but you're also co-regulating. You're doing that with other people. And there's been
Mm,
so much studies about what happens to our hearts when we're doing that together, the way that they start to beat in the same rhythm, and all of this great co-regulation, safety, connection feelings start to come in. So any kind of singing or humming,
uh-huh.
um,
That's a
taking
natural thing.
it's a
Keep
very
going.
natural thing. If you look at
Uh-huh.
indigenous cultures, you
Yes.
will see all of these vagal tone. And that's one of the really exciting things that happened to me when I started to really look at this. It's like, I think every great scripture I've read, any Shabbat I've understood or attempted to understand, mantra, I think that these great people are in a fully automated, regulated state, that these wisdoms come through, is that this is what a fully functioning nervous system can produce, are these beautiful
Mhm.
poems and shabads and scriptures that are just so beautiful. So
Yeah.
anyway, I digress right there. But so singing, chanting, dancing, moving, swaying. Like if you are feeling
Sway.
yourself in a more of a dorsal, going into shutdown, where
Freeze.
you're feeling shut down, if you can just start to rock yourself, you
Mm,
can even sway. It's because what happens when we're in this, we didn't really go over all the different parts of the nervous system, but when we're in this,
yeah.
getting into this disassociative type of turtling, bringing the neck or the head into the shell, and it's getting dark and you're feeling yourself less and less connected. When you feel yourself shifting into that state, gentle rocking, humming, engaging with your senses, maybe even
Mhm.
chewing something crunchy. It brings mobilization to us when we're starting to get immobilized, when we're actually starting to shut down. Um, so
Great.
uh,
So if you're going into a freeze, do a little bit of the swaying or the
exactly.
rocking.
If you, or
Hmm.
as you feel yourself starting to get more and more depressed about what's going on in the world,
Yeah.
feel that
Move.
depression, and but let yourself be soothed by some kind of gentle rocking and maybe humming, and putting a beautiful oil and smelling it on you, or
Yeah.
holding onto an orange and just like sniffing it, or sucking the orange, something that
Hmm.
gets your senses involved,
Yes.
and processing what it is you are feeling, and understanding that a huge part of this is that just like your brain is plastic, your nervous system is plastic too. So it's not stuck in a
Yes.
state. It's highly adaptable, it's adapting all of the time, but we can reshape it and repattern these bottlenecks, these places where we used to get stuck in, and start to understand our individual technique, because there's each one of us has a different way that we move ourselves out of these states, and a lot of
Hmm.
them are just very, very intuitive. um, Dancing and shaking, I would recommend, if you are in a place where you can actually shake it off.
Yeah.
um, a couple weeks ago, I was driving and almost got into an accident, but didn't, but had the wherewithal because of this work to realize, okay, my heart's pounding, I'm freaked out. And rather than just driving home and then going inside the house and yelling at someone in the house, or like freaking out over the shoe being in the wrong place, I think I'm going to move this through my body before I get in the house. And so I just started tapping my heart, and I started
Uh-huh.
saying, you did it. You're alive. That was scary, but it's okay right now. Keep watching the road. You're driving. You have another mile until you get home. okay, let's do some deep breaths. Inhale, get the exhale longer than the inhale. And then I was starting to feel myself regulated. Good job, body. Your reflexes were working great. And then I had enough energy when I knew I was actually really processing it. Then I was hoping and wishing that the person who almost hit me was also doing okay. So that
Oh,
was a
wow.
sign of like, okay, I've got enough
Yeah.
energy right now to actually care about another person or to
Right.
wonder about how another person is doing. So
Uh-huh.
lots of these things are intuitive, but we have to know that it's going to be that the body is going to request the movement of the energy first. And so if we can
Yeah.
move it in the body, and then what I did is I did a co-regulating thing. I went home and I shared it with the person that I saw next. It was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I almost got into an accident. It's okay. So then it was kind of me coming, like the deer coming back to the herd and having the new
Exactly.
feeling accepted. See,
Yes.
it's the piece of the things that are concerning us and worrying us that we're not sharing with people after we've felt
Mhm.
them in our bodies. That's that final, it's done, it's completed. Next, you have more
Yes.
energy for whatever is
Clean
next.
slate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Taking
Well, so,
Taking
oh,
one
go ahead.
other last thing I'd like to say is just
Mhm.
taking a cold shower, getting,
Oh, yeah.
submerging into cold water if that works for your body type, and if you're really
Hmm.
strong, and if you don't have, an eating disorder or a heart
Yeah.
disorder or Raymond's disease, these types of cold water hydrotherapies are stimulating, in good measure. Don't overdo it,
Yeah.
but in good measure to the vagus nerve.
Okay. I didn't actually realize that.
Yes,
So there's so much here. And I know you're going to send, I'll put the article in the show notes that has the 15, but I
great.
think you just named a number of really good ones as we kind of wrap up here. Breath, move the body, shake, actually share your experience with someone to
Yes.
see if there's anything else. And then the feel is sort of the preliminary. It's like notice that something's happening. And if you have the impulse to be in your mind about it, see if you can draw upon the feel and come in and start tracking the sensation. Because I think what you're saying is the outcome is if you take the time to do that, resolution will happen a lot quicker,
Yes.
clarity will happen a lot quicker,
Yes.
compassion will rise, like what happened with you with almost being in an accident. By the
Mhm.
time you got home, you felt compassion for the other driver. That
Yeah.
means you are regulated again.
Yes, exactly.
So that there's so much more, but if there's one final thing that you would want to share with our listeners today, just about the power of this part of our body, our intelligence, is there anything you want to add?
I think I would just recap something that we already talked about, which is our body knows how to do it. It,
Yes.
it is an organ that is built to learn to work with everything, to process everything. It is constantly telling us the truth. We're just not listening to it. We have an idea in our head that is is a lot of times not congruent with the wisdom that our bodies are giving us, and that the way that we have access to that treasure chest in all of us is by slowing down. That slowing down brings the clarity, slowing down brings the feel.
Mhm.
Slowing down helps us to understand it's already there. You already have it. That which you are seeking and looking for in the outside world is already inside of you. You're just moving too fast to not be able to feel it and have access to it. And to find people, places, and things in your life that will support that journey, will support you in understanding yourself, your biology. And I'm really hopeful, and I really believe that there's going to be more and more, like, as I'm saying this, I'm hoping, like, even, the yoga classes that can be so sympathetic in their
Yeah.
nature, and that's part of where what I'm doing right now with the yoga teaching that I'm teaching. It's just restorative. It's just the restorative practices right now
Yeah.
to support that sunya, that deep sense of listening and knowing from within. So
Mm.
to learn to trust ourselves more will become more available when we are slowing down more. Not that we stop, we don't
Mm.
disengage, but the one thing that we need in our culture is more time to value what slowing down brings to us.
I totally agree with you. What a beautiful parting message. Patricia, thank you
Yeah,
so much for your wisdom and your heart. And let's circle back another time.
great.
But for listeners, just so you know, I'm going to give you all the links in the show notes of how they can find you. And I feel like there's a program that you have coming up that maybe you want to speak about, or is it already underway?
I just rolled it out on the 1st of September. And
Okay.
so I've been doing this 5-week program. It's called Slow is Fast. Um, 5-week
Love it.
wellness program. Yeah. And so it's all around spending these 5 weeks slowing down, me giving you the psychoeducation around your nervous system, and then also taking you through this listening protocol, um, which is an intervention, a listening, an acoustic intervention to help strengthen the vagus nerve that is done at home through your own phone, where you're listening to especially
Oh,
filtered music to
yeah.
bring in that vagal tone. And so while you're engaged in the 5 weeks, you're also doing this listening protocol, doing restorative yoga at home, whenever you want. And then we also meet weekly for the psychoeducation part of understanding
Okay.
ourselves, the nervous system. So
Sounds
yeah.
wonderful. So that will be on your website
Yep,
if they
and
want to know. I mean, there'll be another one. You'll be launching another
I'm
one.
enrolling in it for it right now.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
it's
great.
going to be in the end of September, I think the third week of September, and I'm doing it with individuals, couples, groups, and super excited. I've been starting to work with families around this as
Oh,
well. So it's
oh,
been amazing, really fulfilling work.
oh,
To,
what an amazing thing to bring into a family system as a shared
it's
language.
incredible. Yeah,
Wow.
loving it. Yeah.
And you do that online with families, couples,
I'm
individuals?
with COVID coming its way, so we're in
Yeah.
Boulder, right? And so
Yeah.
I right now will only be seeing people outside, um,
Mhm.
uh, and I do it on Zoom. I've been working a lot with
Okay,
people on Zoom, so
great. So people all over the country could find you for this, families, and it's good for me to know that so that I
yeah,
can share more. I didn't know about the family part too.
yeah. That's
All
been
right.
fairly recent in the last couple of months. I just started doing that, so
I
yeah,
love it.
yeah.
Oh, so good to be with you.
You
Thank you.
too. Thank you for
Mm.
inviting me.